When Grandpa died last spring, I thought I was inheriting a working farm. What I actually got was a mountain of debt, broken equipment, and land that hadn't turned a profit in over a decade. The medical bills from his final illness had eaten through whatever savings he'd managed to accumulate, and the farm had been slowly declining for years as he became too old to maintain it properly. I was 26, fresh out of college with a degree in agricultural business, and I'd planned to modernize the operation and make it profitable again. But reality hit hard when I met with the bank and discovered that the farm owed more than it was worth. The mortgage was 3 months behind, equipment loans were in default, and property taxes hadn't been paid in 2 years. "You've got 60 days to bring everything current," the loan officer told me bluntly. "Otherwise, we'll have to begin foreclosure proceedings." I needed $43,000 just to catch up on the overdue payments, and that didn't include the ongoing operating expenses. The farm's checking account had less than $800 in it, and the last harvest had barely covered the cost of seed and fuel. I spent sleepless nights going through Grandpa's records, looking for assets I could sell to raise the money. Most of the equipment was old and in poor condition, worth more as scrap metal than as functioning machinery. The livestock had been sold off years ago when Grandpa could no longer care for them properly. That's when I remembered the old John Deere tractor sitting in the back corner of the barn. It was a 1952 Model B that hadn't run since I was a kid, but vintage tractors were popular with collectors and restoration enthusiasts. Even in non-running condition, it might be worth a few $1,000s. It wasn't nearly enough to save the farm, but every dollar counted when you were facing foreclosure. I decided to call a scrap dealer to see what he'd pay for it. Chapter 2. The Old John Deere. The tractor had been Grandpa's pride and joy when I was growing up. He'd bought it used in 1965, the year my father was born, and had used it to work every acre of the farm for over 30 years. I remembered riding on his lap as a small child, learning to steer while he operated the clutch and throttle. But the old John Deere had been sitting idle for 20 years, ever since Grandpa bought a newer tractor to handle the farm's increasing workload. He'd always said he was going to restore the Model B someday, turn it into a showpiece for parades and antique tractor pulls. But like so many of his retirement plans, that project had never materialized. Now the tractor sat under a tarp in the barn, its green paint faded and its tires flat. Mice had built nests in the seat cushions, and rust had claimed the exhaust pipe and various metal fittings. It looked like exactly what it was, a piece of farm equipment that had outlived its usefulness. I called Jimmy Patterson, who ran a salvage yard about 20 miles away. He specialized in old farm equipment and might be interested in the tractor for parts or restoration. "A 52 Model B," he said when I described it. "Those are getting pretty collectible. If the engine block isn't cracked and the transmission is intact, I might go as high as $3,000 for it." $3,000 wouldn't solve my problems, but it would buy me a little more time to figure out a solution. I arranged for Jimmy to come look at the tractor the following Saturday. But first, I needed to assess its condition more thoroughly. I spent Friday afternoon cleaning off the accumulated dust and debris, checking for obvious damage or missing parts. The more complete the tractor was, the more Jimmy would be willing to pay for it. I was removing the engine cover to check the condition of the motor when I noticed something that didn't belong. Wedged between the engine block and the firewall was a small package wrapped in oilcloth and secured with wire. Chapter 3. The Hidden Package. My hands trembled as I carefully extracted the package from its hiding place. It had been wedged so tightly between engine components that it was invisible unless you were specifically looking for it. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to hide it where it wouldn't be found during routine maintenance or casual inspection. The oilcloth wrapping was old, but had protected the contents from moisture and dirt. As I unwrapped it, I found a metal box about the size of a paperback book, along with an envelope addressed to me in Grandpa's familiar handwriting. The envelope was sealed with wax, and my name was written across the front in the careful script Grandpa had used for important documents. My heart pounded as I opened it and began reading the letter inside. "Dear Tommy," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've inherited more problems than solutions. I'm sorry about that, but I hope what's in this box will help you understand that some things are more valuable than money, and that our family has always found a way to survive hard times." The letter went on to explain that Grandpa had hidden the box in the tractor because he knew that someday, when things got desperate enough, I would think to sell it. He'd counted on my practical nature and my knowledge of the farm's equipment to lead me to this discovery. "The tractor was the first thing I bought when I married your grandmother," the letter continued. "It represented our hopes for the future, our belief that hard work and determination could build something lasting. I want you to have what's inside this box. But more importantly, I want you to understand the story behind it." The metal box was locked, but Grandpa had included a small key taped to the bottom of the envelope. My hand shook as I inserted the key and turned it, hearing the old lock mechanism click open. Inside the box were items that would change everything I thought I knew about my grandfather and our family's history. But it was the stack of old letters tied with a faded ribbon that caught my attention first. Chapter 4. Letters from the Past. The letters were addressed to my grandfather, but they weren't from anyone I recognized. They were signed, "Your loving brother, Michael," and dated from the 1950s and 1960s. I'd never heard Grandpa mention having a brother, and my father had always told me that Grandpa was an only child. As I read through the letters, a story emerged that completely contradicted everything I'd been told about our family history. Michael Thompson was writing from California, where he'd apparently moved after serving in the Korean War. He'd started a small construction company that had grown into a major contracting business. The letters painted a picture of two brothers who had taken very different paths after the war. Michael had gone west to seek his fortune in the booming post-war economy, while my grandfather had returned to the family farm to care for their aging parents. "I know you think I abandoned the family by leaving," Michael wrote in one letter from 1957, "but I'm building something out here that will benefit all of us someday. The money I'm sending isn't charity, it's an investment in our shared future." The letters revealed that Michael had been sending money to help support the farm for over a decade. He'd paid for new equipment, helped with mortgage payments during bad years, and even funded improvements to the farmhouse. But he'd insisted that his contributions remain secret. "Don't tell anyone where the money is coming from," he wrote repeatedly. "Let people think you're just a successful farmer. I don't want them to know that Thompson Construction is keeping the farm afloat." The final letter in the stack was dated 1968 and carried devastating news. Michael had been killed in a construction accident, and his business partners were liquidating the company. But he'd made provisions for his brother's family in his will. "By the time you read this, the lawyers will have contacted you about my estate," the letter said. "I've left everything to you and your family, but I've structured it so the money won't be available until it's really needed. I know you're too proud to accept charity, but this isn't charity. It's family taking care of family." I looked back at the metal box, realizing there had to be more to this story. Chapter 5. The Trust Fund. Beneath the letters, I found legal documents that explained how Michael's inheritance had been structured. He'd established a trust fund that would provide financial support for the farm, but only under specific circumstances. The money couldn't be accessed for routine expenses or improvements. It was reserved for genuine emergencies that threatened the family's survival. The trust had been managed by a law firm in California for over 50 years, growing through careful investments and compound interest. According to the most recent statement in the box, it was now worth over $2 million. But accessing the money required meeting specific criteria outlined in Michael's will. The farm had to be in genuine financial distress, with foreclosure or bankruptcy proceedings actually initiated. The beneficiary had to demonstrate that they'd exhausted all other options and that the money would be used to preserve the farm for future generations. Most importantly, the beneficiary had to understand and accept the responsibility that came with Michael's gift. The money wasn't meant to make anyone wealthy. It was meant to ensure that the Thompson family farm would survive to be passed down to the next generation. I found contact information for the law firm that managed the trust, along with detailed instructions for how to claim the inheritance. There were forms to fill out, documentation to provide, and a formal review process that could take several weeks. But there was also a provision for emergency situations where immediate action was required to prevent foreclosure. In such cases, the trustees could authorize an emergency disbursement within 72 hours, provided all the necessary documentation was submitted. I realized that my current situation qualified perfectly for emergency assistance. The bank's 60-day deadline, the threat of foreclosure, and my desperate search for assets to sell all met the criteria Michael had established for accessing the trust fund. But as I continued reading through the documents, I discovered that there was more to Michael's story than just financial success. There were photographs, military records, and personal mementos that revealed a man who had sacrificed his own dreams to ensure his family's security. Chapter 6. Michael's Sacrifice. The photographs in the box showed a young man in military uniform, then later in work clothes, standing next to construction equipment. Michael Thompson had been handsome and confident, with the same determined expression I remembered seeing in pictures of my grandfather. His military records showed that he'd served with distinction in Korea, earning several commendations for bravery under fire. But it was his personal letters to his girlfriend back home that revealed the true cost of his choices. "I want to come home and marry you," he'd written to someone named Sarah in 1953. "I want to help Robert work the farm and raise a family in the place where we grew up. But I can see that the farm can't support 2 families, and Robert has already started his life there. I have to find another way to contribute." The letters showed that Michael had given up his chance at the life he'd wanted in order to ensure that my grandfather could have his. He'd gone to California not because he preferred it to farming, but because he understood that someone had to sacrifice their personal dreams for the family's survival. His construction business had been successful, but the work had been dangerous and demanding. The photographs showed him growing older and more weathered with each passing year, the toll of physical labor and business stress evident in his face. He'd never married, never had children of his own. Instead, he'd devoted his life to building a financial foundation that would protect his brother's family for generations to come. Every dollar he'd earned had been invested with one goal in mind, ensuring that the Thompson farm would never be lost to debt or economic hardship. The final photograph in the collection showed Michael standing next to a brand new John Deere tractor, the same model that was now sitting in our barn. On the back, he'd written, "For Robert, may this help you build the life I couldn't have." I realized that the tractor I'd been planning to sell for scrap metal was actually a gift from an uncle I'd never known existed, a man who had sacrificed everything to ensure that our family farm would survive. Chapter 7. The Phone Call. With shaking hands, I called the law firm in California that had been managing Michael's trust for over 50 years. The receptionist transferred me to an attorney named David Chen, who had apparently been expecting my call for decades. "Mr. Thompson," he said warmly when I identified myself, "I've been wondering when I'd hear from you. Your great-uncle Michael left very specific instructions about how to handle this situation." I explained my circumstances, the mounting debts, the threat of foreclosure, and my discovery of the hidden documents. Mr. Chen listened patiently, occasionally asking questions about specific details. "You definitely qualify for emergency assistance," he confirmed. Michael anticipated exactly this kind of situation when he structured the trust. He knew that farming was a risky business, and that even the most careful family could face financial crisis due to circumstances beyond their control. The process was surprisingly straightforward. I needed to fax copies of the foreclosure notice, recent bank statements, and the farm's financial records. Mr. Chen would review everything and, assuming it met the trust's criteria, could authorize an immediate transfer of funds to cover all outstanding debts. "There's just one condition," he added. Michael insisted that anyone who received money from the trust had to understand the full story of his sacrifice. He didn't want to be remembered as just a wealthy uncle who bailed out the family. He wanted his story to be told and his choices to be understood. Mr. Chen explained that Michael had left detailed instructions about how his story should be shared with future generations. He'd wanted his sacrifice to inspire rather than create guilt, to show that family loyalty sometimes required difficult choices, but that those choices could create lasting benefits. He also left specific instructions about the farm's future, Mr. Chen continued. The trust will continue to provide support as needed, but only if the farm remains in family hands and is operated according to sustainable agricultural practices. Michael believed strongly in environmental stewardship and wanted to ensure that the land would be preserved for future generations. Within 2 hours, I had faxed all the required documents. Mr. Chen called back that afternoon to confirm that the emergency disbursement had been approved. $50,000 would be transferred to the farm's account the next business day, enough to bring all loans current and provide operating capital for the next growing season. Chapter 8. The Revelation. That evening, I sat in the barn next to the old John Deere, reading through Michael's letters again and trying to process everything I'd learned. My grandfather had carried the secret of his brother's sacrifice for over 50 years, never telling anyone in the family about the financial support that had kept the farm viable. I began to understand why Grandpa had seemed so confident during difficult years, why he'd never appeared worried even when crops failed or equipment broke down. He'd known that Michael's trust fund was there as a safety net, but he'd also known that accessing it would mean admitting that the farm couldn't survive on its own. The pride that had kept him from telling the family about Michael's help was the same pride that had driven him to work harder and longer than anyone else in the county. He'd been determined to prove that the farm could be successful without relying on his brother's sacrifice. But as I read more carefully through the documents, I realized that Grandpa had been planning for this moment all along. He'd hidden the trust information in the tractor because he knew that eventually someone would face a crisis severe enough to require Michael's help. He'd chosen the tractor specifically because it represented the connection between past and future, between Michael's sacrifice and the family's survival. The machine that had helped build our farm's success was also the key to ensuring its continuation. I found a final letter from Grandpa, written just months before his death and hidden beneath all the other documents. It was addressed to whoever would eventually discover Michael's secret. "I hope you understand now why I never told anyone about Michael," he wrote. "It wasn't because I was ashamed of needing help. It was because I wanted his sacrifice to mean something. Every year that we kept the farm running without touching his money was a year that honored his choice to give up his own dreams for our family. But I also knew that someday, someone would need that help. Michael built that trust fund to save the farm when saving it seemed impossible. Don't feel guilty about using it. Feel grateful that you had an uncle who loved his family enough to sacrifice everything for their future." Chapter 9. Understanding the Legacy. The money transfer came through as promised, and I was able to pay off all the farm's outstanding debts with enough left over to begin necessary improvements. But more important than the financial relief was the understanding of what I'd inherited along with the farm. I wasn't just the owner of 240 acres of farmland. I was the steward of a legacy that had been built through sacrifice, determination, and love. Michael had given up his chance at the life he'd wanted so that future generations of Thompsons could work the land that had been in our family for over a century. My grandfather had spent 50 years honoring that sacrifice by working harder than necessary, by refusing to take the easy way out, by building something sustainable that could survive without constant financial support. He'd used Michael's safety net only when absolutely necessary, and even then, he'd structured things so that the next generation would understand the full weight of what they'd inherited. I began to see the farm differently. Every field, every building, every piece of equipment represented not just agricultural assets, but the dreams and sacrifices of people who had come before me. The old John Deere wasn't just a broken-down tractor. It was a symbol of Michael's love for his family and Grandpa's determination to honor that love. I decided to restore the tractor, not to sell it, but to preserve it as a reminder of the family's history. I wanted my own children someday to understand that their inheritance wasn't just land and money, but a legacy of people who had chosen family loyalty over personal ambition. The trust fund would continue to provide support when needed, but I was determined to follow Grandpa's example and use it only as a last resort. I wanted to prove that Michael's sacrifice had created something sustainable, something that could thrive through good management and hard work rather than financial dependence. I also began researching Michael's life in California. reaching out to people who had known him and learning more about the man who had shaped our family's destiny from a distance. The picture that emerged was of someone who had found success in business but had never stopped thinking of himself as a farmer at heart. Chapter 10. Honoring the Past. I spent the next several months implementing the improvements that the farm needed to become profitable again. New irrigation systems, updated equipment, and modern farming techniques transformed the operation from a struggling family farm into a viable agricultural business. But I also made sure to preserve the elements that connected the farm to its history. I restored the old John Deere to perfect working condition, using it for special occasions and community events where it could serve as a reminder of the farm's heritage. I created a small museum in one corner of the barn, displaying Michael's letters, photographs, and military records alongside artifacts from the farm's history. Local schools began bringing students to learn about agricultural history and the role that family farms had played in the region's development. The trust fund's managers in California were impressed by how I'd used Michael's gift. Rather than simply paying off debts and continuing with business as usual, I'd invested in improvements that would ensure the farm's long-term sustainability. "Your great-uncle would be proud," Mr. Chen told me during one of our regular check-ins. He always hoped that his sacrifice would inspire future generations to build something even better than what he'd given up. I also reached out to other family members, sharing Michael's story and helping them understand the true history of our farm's survival. Some were amazed to learn about the uncle they'd never known existed, while others were moved to tears by the depth of his sacrifice. My father was particularly affected by the revelation. "I always wondered why Dad seemed so confident during the tough years," he said. "Now I understand that he was carrying the weight of Michael's sacrifice and was determined to prove worthy of it." The farm began turning a profit within 2 years, generating enough income to support my family, while also contributing to the local community through employment and agricultural services. I established a scholarship fund in Michael's name, helping young people from farming families pursue agricultural education. But perhaps the most important change was in my own understanding of what it meant to be a farmer and a member of the Thompson family. Chapter 11. The Future. 5 years after discovering Michael's secret, the farm is thriving in ways that would have seemed impossible during those desperate early days. We've expanded our operations to include organic vegetables and direct-to-consumer sales, building on the foundation of traditional grain farming that has sustained the family for generations. The old John Deere still runs perfectly, and I use it regularly for light work around the farm. Every time I start its engine, I think about Michael's sacrifice and Grandpa's determination to honor that gift through hard work and careful stewardship. I've also started a tradition of sharing Michael's story with anyone who visits the farm. His letters are displayed in the museum, and I make sure that everyone understands how one man's willingness to sacrifice his own dreams created opportunities for future generations. The trust fund remains available for emergencies, but I haven't needed to access it since that first crisis. The farm generates enough income to support ongoing operations and improvements, proving that Michael's investment was sound and that Grandpa's faith in the land's potential was justified. I've married and started a family of my own, and my children are already learning about their great-great-uncle Michael and the choices he made for their benefit. They understand that their inheritance isn't just financial. It's a responsibility to continue building on the foundation that previous generations created through sacrifice and hard work. The broken tractor that I'd planned to sell for scrap metal became the key to understanding my family's true legacy. What seemed like a desperate last resort for raising money turned into the discovery of a story that changed everything I thought I knew about our history. Michael Thompson never got to marry the woman he loved, never had children of his own, never got to work the land that he'd grown up on. But his sacrifice created something that has lasted for generations and will continue to benefit his family long into the future. Every morning when I walk out to check on the crops, I pass by the spot where the old John Deere sits in the barn. It reminds me that sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones that are hidden from view, waiting for the right moment to reveal their true worth. The farm that I almost lost to debt and foreclosure is now a thriving operation that employs 12 people and contributes significantly to the local economy. But more importantly, it's a living monument to the power of family loyalty and the willingness to sacrifice for something greater than yourself. Thank you for listening to this incredible story of family sacrifice, hidden legacies, and the power of never giving up hope. Michael Thompson's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest gifts come from people we never knew, and that family loyalty can create benefits that last for generations. This tale shows us that what appears to be worthless or broken might actually hold the key to our future, and that the most important inheritances aren't always the ones that are obvious or expected. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please let me know what part of the world you're listening from, and share any stories you might have about discovering hidden family histories or unexpected inheritances that changed your life. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing it with others. These stories matter because they remind us that family bonds can transcend time and distance, and that the sacrifices made by previous generations often create opportunities we never knew existed. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most valuable discoveries are hidden in the most unlikely places, waiting for the right moment to reveal the true depth of family love and sacrifice.